That's good. Okay. Good morning and welcome to Tulane University. It is my pleasure to introduce our first session, Cross-Border Energy Partnership, Hydrogen CCS and Clean Fuels Trade. If time allows at the end of this session, the panel will take questions submitted by the audience. To submit a question, please scan the QR code on our screen to the left. Please be sure to silence your cell phones and enjoy the conversation, and give a warm welcome to our moderator, Mr. Randel Young.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Randel Young. I'm Executive Director of the Tulane Energy Law and Policy Center, and we want to thank you for attending this third and final day of the Future of Energy Forum. We've had an enormous amount of fun in putting it on. I hope you're still getting something good out of each of these sessions, and we appreciate you being here. A little background before we get started, if I may, about the Tulane Energy Law and Policy Center. The center is a newly formed interdisciplinary policy and research center and a global energy discussion platform based from the Tulane Law School. Now, we are not just talking about about energy law and energy regulation. Our mission is to address today's complex energy policy questions and commercial challenges broadly. We use a multidisciplinary approach. It's data-driven, science-based research methods, leveraging the expertise that's available not just at the university, but all across the academic platform. We've created a number of strategic alliances, which we're expanding, with industry groups and academic alliances across the United States and around the world. You've heard a number of our senior fellows and other folks from the center on various panels this week, and you'll be hearing a lot more from us in the future, but we're very excited about the announcement earlier this week on university-wide energy cooperation, because that's completely within our sweet spot of our mission, and we hope to become a big part and an increasing part of the interdisciplinary energy programming effort launched here at the forum by President Mike Pitts earlier this week. Let me take a couple of minutes to frame the discussion. The title of the discussion is Cross-Border Energy Partnerships, and as we get into this, you may be thinking that we're going to be talking about the traditional partnership structures of all kinds of projects. In classes I teach at Tulane on global project development, we focus on the roles of essential stakeholders as opposed to partners in devising effective long-term energy project development and investment strategies. And of course, we focus on the private stakeholders in a project value chain, the supplier, developers, EPC and O&M contractors, off-takers, and the like. But we also focus on the critical impact of the policies and actions of governmental stakeholders, host governments of a project, foreign investor, home government, each suppliers, transporters, and end users government can have a huge impact in creating the stable trade investment climate that's necessary to identify, manage, and price project and investment risk of a major project over the life cycle of what is usually 30 to 50 or even longer energy investment. So we are seeing seismic changes in the approaches taken by the United States government and countries around the world, some in response and some on their own, challenging traditional intergovernmental alliances and long-term policies that have promoted global interdependence for decades in the energy business. So we thought it would be interesting today to hear from some perspectives on the impact of governmental policies on the viability, pricing, and stability of energy and critical minerals projects and markets around the world, both now and in the near future. We are really honored today to have two extraordinary career public servants, each now retired from public office. So thankfully for us, they're advising the private sector, and they're here and can give us the benefit of their advice. But both of these folks have deep backgrounds and experience in support of their respective governments' initiatives in promoting stable energy critical minerals and trade policies, both back home and on cross-border projects with global energy and national security implications. By way of an overview, we're going to hear first from former U.S. Ambassador James Story, and secondly, in a deeper dive into the impacts of the changing trade policies between the United States and Canada, which we're all focused on in this part of the country because of the trade relationships between the Gulf Coast and Canada, from former Alberta Minister, the Honorable Sonya Savage. Each of Jimmy and Sonya have asked not to be referred to by their former titles, but informally by their first names, and I'm more than happy to accommodate that request. It doesn't reflect my insensitivity or lack of custom, but I think it will make the conversation move a lot more quickly. I would refer you to their impressive bios on the forum website for details, but by way of short backgrounds, Jimmy Story spent almost all of his professional life as a career U.S. Foreign Service officer, serving in important roles in energy producing and mineral producing countries and regions around the world. He is the last U.S. ambassador to Venezuela, where he was engaged heavily on issues of democracy, but also in support of U.S. interests in the oil and mining industries. Most recently, as the acting ambassador to Angola and Sao Tome and Principe in Africa, he supported U.S. companies working on the Libido corridor to export critical minerals to the United States. He also supported regional efforts to stop the fighting in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where some 26 trillion cubic feet in critical mineral reserves have been identified. Since retirement from public service, Jimmy's a founding partner of Global Frontier Advisors, supporting clients on developing renewable energy, AI, and data, and renewable energy credit strategies and landscapes around the world. He also serves as a senior advisor to Dinámica Americas, an advisory firm focused on navigating markets and governments across Latin America. Sonya Savage also has had a distinguished career, in her case, as an energy and environmental and government relations lawyer in Alberta before running for public office in 2019. Prior to being elected to public office, Sonya was already a leading advocate in the energy industry with 13 years experience in the energy pipeline industry, and held senior government relations positions at both Enbridge and with the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association. As Minister of Energy, Sonya led the ministry through the global pandemic years and the energy price collapse that followed. Challenging times. Her many achievements included implementing a liability management framework to accelerate reclamation in oil and gas wells, overhaul the Alberta Energy Regulator, and modernized Alberta's legal, policy, and fiscal frameworks in new and emerging growth areas, including developing strategies to accelerate energy transition investments in critical minerals, hydrogen, geothermal, energy storage, and nuclear SMRs. In 2022, she developed Alberta's first framework to advance CCUS through CCUS hubs, allocating core space to 25 projects across the province. Sonya also served her government as Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, where she developed Alberta's net zero climate strategy, known as the Emissions Reduction and Energy Development Plan of 2023. She retired from politics in 2023 and returned to law practice with Borden, Ladner, Gervais, one of Canada's leading law firms. She serves on the board of E3 Lithium, is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and serves as a senior advisor to Navigator, Canada's leading communications and government relations firm. We will start today with some overview remarks from Jimmy and Sonya, but I want to keep time at the end of our presentation for follow-up questions from the audience. So please take down the link and be sure and forward your questions. Jimmy, could you please kick us off? Thank you.
Sounds great. Everybody hear me okay? And awesome. And Randel and Tulane, my good friend Mac Bruton back here as well. Thank y'all so much for the opportunity to come today to speak with you all. This is a hearty group. It's day 3 of a conference. You know, y'all are up early and you're here. So we can try to have a little bit of levity as well, I would hope. And I just want to start out by saying, you know, I'm really good at a cocktail party as a diplomat for 27 years. You know, we have one expert up here on the topic, or 2 experts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to probably bore you all to tears by walking through a little bit of the history about where we got where we are, and look forward a little bit on the direction in which we're going, of which I have some concerns. Right? So my take on this, on the energy policy piece, I'm going to start us off in 1911. Are you yawning yet? You know, when Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty at that time, he recognized that oil had a higher energy density than coal. And he went about changing and convincing the government of the world's greatest navy that had ever existed that we needed to change from coal, of which they had much, to oil, of which they had none. So imagine the hubris, which we all know Churchill, right? So that it took for a person to say, we're going to do this completely different thing, and it transformed geopolitics to this day. It basically led to him securing a government stake in Anglo-Persian Oil Company to guarantee supply, and tethered Britain's power to the Middle East. And that laid forward the geopolitics of today. And as this geopolitics of oil unfolded, we can really look at how it had an impact on World War II. The fact that we were doing sanctions against Japan, and they were working in the East Indies. They attacked Pearl Harbor in order to cripple the United States. For his part, Hitler had to go into Romania to get oil fields to fuel the war machine, then into the Caucasus to do the same. So at the end of the Second World War, we kind of got together and said, we got to do something. This is a problem. We've got a problem. It's a problem that we have this critical thing that everybody needs, both for energy production and for domestic, their own defense industry. And we need to figure out a way to promote stability and improve livelihoods to avoid future conflicts. So I kind of trace the derivation, to some extent, of the United Nations to the problem of oil. And certainly the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, while not specifically created to deal with the issue of energy and how you share energy and how you trade in energy, certainly led to a fixed exchange rate system, created the dollar as the world reserve currency so that you know how to trade this really important asset. Right? I'm personally very concerned that we put the dollar as the world's reserve currency in jeopardy. I think the day that happens, we're in deep kimchi. I don't know if that's an expression you all use here in Tulane. We sometimes say that in South Carolina, where I'm from, right? It would be a problem. Just because we reached stability in oil markets didn't necessarily mean that all conflicts were resolved. And in fact, since 1973, between 1.25% of all interstate wars have been linked to oil interests. Control over reserves, pipelines, shipping lanes. This is everything from Iraq invading Kuwait, problems in the South China Sea, Iran's support to terrorist organizations, and certainly consumer nations also intervening in security supply. They wanted to intervene to secure supply, making this commodity something that has most profoundly affected geopolitics. In order to try to move past this period, we created the International Energy Agency as a multilateral approach to coordinate energy policies and deal with the issues of dependency. But politics can be unpredictable. Now, I've made a career out of not staking out a political position. I don't intend to stake one out today with you all here in Tulane. I've been nonpartisan or bipartisan for my entire career. But what I can tell you is that elections have consequences. The election of Hugo Chavez, and I'm happy to take questions specific to Venezuela moving forward. I know it's in the news a lot now. But the election of Hugo Chavez started an unprecedented attack against the institutions of that country, and now you have a criminal organization masquerading as a government responsible or in control of the world's largest proven reserves of oil, as well as a country that is frankly awash in the critical minerals that are going to fuel the 21st century economy. The election in this country also had consequences. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Trade Organization had largely dealt with the issue of tariffs and trade between states. Now the issue of tariffs have come back. A 50% tariff against Brazil, and I'm anticipating we're going to have more problems there. I don't know if you saw that Bolsonaro just got a 27-year sentence. I served 3 times in Brazil. They have a great expression. It all ends in pizza. I don't know what it means. It sounds great in Portuguese. But there probably will be some grand bargain worked out where he won't necessarily spend 27 years in jail. But still, you can already see that Secretary Rubio has come out very strongly against this decision by the Supreme Court in Brazil, and a lot of politics are at play. But how does that affect the United States, a 50% tariff? It's not just orange juice and coffee. It's also critical minerals. Brazil has the second largest reserves of rare earth elements. Now, they're not processing them. They need to, but that's an issue. 50% tariff on copper. This is a problem. We need the copper. We need to get the project in Panama. Hopefully, we can help them get that project off the ground. Certainly, we have domestic sources of copper. But all of these things lead to unpredictability and instability. And capital is a coward. The reason that most foreign direct investment comes to the United States to get 5% return is the sanctity of contracts and rule of law. When you mess with that, you mess with the stability and predictability that exist in international commerce, and the effects of that would be devastating. So as we turn forward, I'm getting ready to conclude here. I'm very conscious of the time that I've been allocated. Much like oil of the 20th century, we're now moving into critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, that'll be that dynamic force for the 21st century. And that dynamic force, unfortunately, is being monopolized by one country, a strategic competitor, China. They are processing 90% of the rare earth elements, and 99% of the heavy rare earths. Well, why does that matter? Well, if you want to put magnets in an F-35, you have to have heavy rare earths. And if we're getting all of them from China, they've already proven that if we're going to play the tariff game, they can play the tariff game. Or they can play the game of not exporting those items to the United States. So even though there's a great article out of Colorado School of Mines about recycling tailings and looking for rare earths there, I think that's part of the issue. I'm a big advocate that we have to continue to work multilaterally, of course bilaterally, but multilaterally and cooperate with other nation states, or we run the risk of moving back into kind of the OPEC era where our supply is being cut off, and it'll have a deleterious effect on the economy. And as we look forward, I kind of think about, well, what do we need? We need the rare earths. We need the critical minerals. Every time we do one of those AI searches, and this is only going to get bigger, it's 10 times more energy than if you do a Google search. I don't use Google anymore. I use Perplexity. Then I cross-reference it with Grok, and then do a chat GPT on top of that. I end up with a bunch of mush, but it takes a lot of energy. Having just served in Africa, a country that 16% had access to the internet a decade ago, today it's 39%. That number should continue to grow. How much energy does that need? How are we going to, as we bridge the digital divide in the world, how are we going to power the future of the planet? You can't do that alone. We're going to have to do that through cooperation, either multilaterally, bilaterally, or regionally. And the questions I would pose are we better positioned to handle the energy transition, which is coming? Are we better positioned to do that alone or with others? I would submit with others. And are we better off with institutions and rules of the road, or a return to energy chaos, which we've already lived through in the 1970s? Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
Wait, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll step in, and I won't go back to 1911. I'll go back 75 years. 75 years in history, and that's when the extensive trade relationship between Canada and the U.S. in in energy really started and really developed. And that was after Alberta, province that I come from, discovered oil in Leduc. And over that time period, starting in 2015, we developed an extensive network of pipelines across the United States. The Enbridge main line, that was the first line that carried oil from Western Canada to the States and to Eastern Canada, crossed the border in Manitoba into Superior, Wisconsin. And since over the past 75 years, there's extensive hardwired pipeline network that takes crude oil from Western Canada all across the United States into Pad 2, where the refineries are hardwired into into Alberta and are configured to take the type of heavy oil production that we produce. Now we have pipeline systems all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Of interest, Canada has the third largest reserves of oil on the planet. Venezuela is the first largest, but Canada, of course, is a stable democracy right next door. And so the extent of the relationship is very long term. We ship 3.9 million barrels a day of oil across the border now, which is about 60%, at least 60% of the imports, crude oil imports of the United States. That's a long-term relationship. When it comes to natural gas, we also have an extensive relationship. In fact, Alberta just did a recent study to study the reserves of natural gas in our province and found that we have 6 times the reserves that we originally thought, 130 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. We ship through largely to the United States. In fact, we export natural gas off of Gulf Coast terminals to world markets. We now have a West Coast pipeline for LNG that's just started shipping LNG to Asian countries in the last few months. But as you look forward, the natural gas that we ship to the United States will actually help backfill some of the exports that the United States is exporting globally around the world. And of course, the United States is going to need a lot of natural gas in the years ahead as we bring on AI and data centers that are powered by natural gas-fired generation. So this is an extensive trade relationship. It's 25% of Canada's exports to the United States are in oil and gas. Primarily, those exports come from my province, Alberta. So, of course, that gets a little shaken when we're going into the CUSMA renegotiations and the tariff wars. So that's caused some monumental policy shifts and there have been implications in our country from the threat to that trade relationship as we look to what do we do when our main export product to a single market is potentially under threat. Well, it's caused a lot of interesting reactions around our country and political implications, east to west in Canada. First of all, we're seeing a huge move to develop east-west domestic trade across our country, which is surprisingly, in our oil and gas trade, we haven't had the extensive east-west domestic trade, but it's also fueled a new sense of urgency to reach new markets around the world, global markets for oil and gas. Just this last week, our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has named projects of national interest to accelerate and to use a new piece of legislation to fast-track and streamline regulatory approvals and basically get around laws that are in place to have projects be able to develop in a quick time frame. LNG Canada Phase 2 is on that list, and that's a West Coast export facility to take natural gas primarily to Malaysia, Japan, and South Korea. But interestingly, a large market in that is China. And it's a monumental shift because just a couple of years ago, the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, said there was no business case for LNG. And he said that when the German Chancellor was in Canada searching for trade relationships in LNG as they try to wean themselves off of Russian gas. And our prime minister said, sorry, there's just not a business case for it. We'll ship you some green hydrogen. So that was just a couple of years ago. Fast forward to today when we're threatened by our main market to the south. All of a sudden, there's not only a business case for natural gas, but it's an accelerated project of national interest that the Prime Minister is going to throw political clout at to get built. Likewise with oil pipelines, the previous Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, vetoed West Coast pipeline, a Northern Gateway pipeline, proposed and actually approved in the regulatory process by Enbridge, was vetoed in 2016 because of climate change commitments, and now it looks like we'll also get a new West Coast, hopefully a new West Coast pipeline. All of this monumental shift in policy and focus is because of concerns and threats to the south. But interestingly, industry and folks in my province want to continue and want to increase and enhance our access to U.S. markets. That's our closest market, our closest neighbor and ally. We have long-term trade relationships. We have the pipeline infrastructure that's already hardwired into markets in the United States. So that's also creating a different approach between my province and provinces to the east on how they're dealing with the trade dispute. My Premier, Danielle Smith, is trying to create friends and allies. She's advocating for a stronger trade relationship, for a continuing trade relationship. But in the eastern part of the country, we have a different approach. It's an elbows-up approach that we have to protect ourselves against the U.S., and we have the Premier of Ontario, just notably in the last couple of weeks, dumping a bottle of Crown Royal out at a news conference, just pouring it on the floor, saying we're going to punish this company because they're moving some of their bottling facilities to the United States. We're not doing that in Alberta because we see the United States as our best friend and ally and the best market to serve to and the best for our producers. So where does that take us going forward? And I think we're going to see some also in a need to align and maybe have some strategic partnerships on critical minerals. We have them in Canada. We have them in abundance, rare earths and critical minerals. We need markets for them. The United States needs access to those markets. So I see some reasons, much of the same reason you mentioned, that we see we're actually terrified that China has that whole value chain pretty much wrapped up, from extraction of the mineral to processing to production to manufacturing, that they have that value chain of critical minerals wrapped up, where we have the resource in Canada. The United States uses them. So I'm hoping as we move into this discussion, we'll probably get in a little bit more on critical minerals, but I see a very strong possibility moving forward to have more strategic alignments in critical minerals. And I actually see for oil and gas to have a more strategic alignment between Canada and the United States, a fortress North America kind of process to enhance our trade relationships in oil and gas and energy critical minerals.
Great, thank you. Sonya, I had a couple of questions really related to one particular topic you alluded to, but I was fascinated by the bifurcated East-West response in Canada to the aggressive tariff posture of the Trump administration. This isn't getting as much play in the media down here, but I think it's something that obviously is of great impact there. But the first question that comes to my mind is, do you think the U.S. just missed the boat in not anticipating that Canada would respond by promoting internal infrastructure investment that would enable them to build pipelines from west to east in response to the threat posed to their industries by their traditional gas supply sources in the USA? It's entirely possible, but if you look at the response as a risk mitigation, obvious risk mitigation strategy, I guess my feeling would be, if we miss that, that's on us. But what's your thought?
Well, interesting, this whole conversation, the tariff threats landed at the same time we were heading into a federal election in Canada. So everything got torqued up. It's every politician, every political party does better, likes to run with a perceived threat, and that they're the party, they're the leader, they're the person who's going to respond to that threat. And that's what we saw in Canada, and we saw that out of Eastern Canada. The threat is the South. We're the party that's going to be able to respond to it. So we had in Canada, it was an odd thing. It was an elbows up campaign. We're going to protect ourselves, and there's a lot of politics torqued into all of that. Meanwhile, in my province, in Alberta, we looked at this and said, you know, this is a long-term trade relationship with the United States. It served both countries well. Canada, it served Canada very well. The President in the United States wants to have energy dominance. Well, we can help with that. We've got the resources that we can supply and ship. If he wants to have energy dominance, he needs access to oil and natural gas, so the United States can export oil and natural gas, and we can backfill. So we saw it as an opportunity to highlight and really strengthen that trade relationship. In the East, where they don't have oil and gas, they're more threatened by some of the automotive sector, and they're more prepared to fight. For us, we wanted to have alliances. So it did have this strange repercussion in our country. And right after the tariff battle started, we had some polling that came out, and which interestingly showed support for east-west national pipelines getting or pipelines to tidewater and alternate markets was at an all-time high in the country. About 78% of people in Quebec and 78% of people in BC supported new oil pipelines to tidewater. That's unprecedented. In those two provinces, that's where the opposition was to previous projects. So there was a huge unintended response.
Interesting. Yeah, I was also thinking, might there also be another difference in the perspective between the eastern provinces and the western provinces? The eastern provinces, it seems to me, had an embedded cost in their investment in the north-south infrastructure that has been a mainstay for 75 years. And then to have to develop new infrastructure from west to east, somebody's going to bear that at the end of the day. And how you structure those rates politically and who bears it and allocates it, might have a driving force in the east in opposition to it. It's just not being expressed very much. Have there been any studies on what an infrastructure development like this would cost and how you would go about approaching it in terms of levelizing that cost between east and west in terms of absorbing it?
Well, we've recently just expanded a pipeline, West Coast pipeline, the Trans Mountain expansion, and it ended up costing about $30 billion. This is not inexpensive infrastructure, $30 billion. And of course, that's going to impact tolls and tariffs. It's what the shippers pay, would impact the cost of doing business. But I don't think that's really been considered so much in the country. In fact, the Trans Mountain pipeline ended up having to be purchased by the federal government because Kinder Morgan found there to be just a little too much political risk when they were building it, and the federal government had to take over and purchase it in 2018. But yeah, the infrastructure's in place to the United States. It's operating. It's capital that was spent years ago. It's the most efficient way to ship, but it's the trade relationships are changing.
Yeah, exactly. Jimmy, I was equally fascinated that you took us back to Bretton Woods in 44. I won't go all the way back to 1911. When world leaders in economics and governments across the world came to address what was then a critical need, akin to what we're seeing in energy today, for new institutions and approaches to stabilizing the global economy. And of course, obviously it's a different, less globalized world, and we're getting less globalized and more regionalized, if not nationalized, in our approaches around the world today. But that effort, forget about the details of the agreement, but that effort resulted in new structures, innovative structures like the IMF, the World Bank, a largely U.S. dollar-denominated global economy, that were innovations that have held us together for over 80 years, but many of which seem to be under attack today. I was wondering, you know, with rising energy demand and the need to carbonize and a pressing need for energy and economic security in the balance, is it time for a Bretton Woods type discussion on energy systems? Now, when I say that, I'm not saying, is there any appetite for globalization? That's not my question. I'm saying, is it time for that type of a broad-ranging discussion? And if so, what would that look like? What would it focus on new regional and economic alliances? Where would the realignments be the most significant?
You've asked a $50 question for sure. It's a deep one. I thought we were going to talk about pouring out Crown Royal, which I believe here in New Orleans would be
That would be awesome.
capital
That'd be a
offense.
crime.
I heard a ripple of reaction in the audience
Right.
for that.
Yeah, I saw hackles go up.
I did.
Listen, I don't. Let me start with this. We are globalized. We're not going away from globalization. The planet is what the planet is, and we will continue to trade, not only terrestrially but beyond. Right? Everything is pixels and data, and that really knows no national boundary. Everything moves without regard to nation state itself, except for labor. Labor is the one thing we can kind of control because you can see a person, but even then you can do labor remotely. Right? Mm-hmm. So I don't think globalization is going away. I do think that politically right now, we're pulling back into kind of I find a very dangerous period of time, the 1930s, where we were thinking about spheres of influence. And you do see more Europe focusing in on Africa, China, their sphere in Asia, in Oceania, and then the United States really focusing in South America. I think that's dangerous. And it's dangerous because we are now living in the safest, most prosperous period of human history. 80 years ago, 90% of the world was living in extreme poverty. Today, that number is 10%. Now, to your specific question, to be brief, which is hard for me, is now the time to start thinking about a new type of agreement? And unfortunately, I think the politics aren't aligned for that right now. Yeah. Collectively, industry and people like those here, we need to be thinking this way because if you don't have access to the raw material, you don't have that sanctity of contract, you know that the rules of the road, we're going to find ourselves with so much unpredictability that we can't pay the bill. You know, how unpredictable was it for that company building the pipeline? They had to get the government to bail them out. You're trying to build a widget, but you have to have a certain input from a mine that only exists in Vietnam. You have to have some rules to be able to get it. You know, yeah. So I think we're going to get there. I think right now we're going to go through a spasm of we're going to go it alone, and I do believe that we have to be careful. And what I'm hearing from you, Sonya, is the United States has been for a very long time, since the end of World War II, the indispensable nation. And if people wake up and find out that actually we're not, that's a bad place to be.
Sonya, do you have any reactions to that, especially related? Earlier you said you seem to be going in a direction of, for critical minerals as an example, that maybe we should be in a realignment on a kind of a new sort of sphere of influence, collective sphere of influence approach. Do you agree, disagree, sort of agree with the assumption that we're going to stick with globalization, we're not going to realign?
Well, it seems to be, and certainly, I speak in the energy space and critical mineral space and resources space, but it seems to be we're aligning globally between East versus West, Western-based democratic nations, including Europe, versus more collectivist view, China, Russia, North Korea. I'm sure we all recall and just in a little bit of shock and horror from my perspective, watching China, Russia, India, North Korea on stage in a military parade in China. That should be terrifying.
Yes,
That
it
should be
should.
absolutely
Yes, it
terrifying
should.
to everybody. And especially when you look at how China has wrapped up the global supply chain for critical minerals. That should be a wake-up call. They're decades ahead. They've been at this for over a decade, spending billions of dollars, making acquisitions in critical minerals, building processing plants. They saw ahead, and they are a decade ahead of us. So if we don't align as Western democracies in ensuring that our resources and our oil, gas, and critical mineral resources are dealt with in an alignment, I think we're heading into a very dangerous world. So where I'd like to see is more North American, maybe South American, maybe hemisphere, but more trade alignments and partnerships.
There are undoubtedly going to be different alignments, but you're saying more but different, right?
Yes.
And don't forget Modi and Putin holding hands. That was
Oh.
another
Well, that is
moment
true.
for me. Yeah, you know, we definitely have to do those things, and the world is splitting like this. But I mean, the idea of globalization is that's kind of like settled science. We are a globalized planet. I agree with you. The regionalization piece is important, and frankly, democracies are in decline. Autocracies have been on the rise for quite some time. And we find ourselves swimming in a shallower pool these days vis-a-vis these other actors.
I kind of think about it in terms of the difference between the word independence and interdependence. I don't see us becoming less interdependent. I think we're going to be interdependent in a different way. But that's kind of a middle ground between what I'm hearing the two of you say. But.
Well, and I just add one more comment to that. I think there is some recognition. I know in Canada, people got a little panicked when the president suggested that Canada should be the 51st state. There was a different reaction in Western Canada than Eastern Canada, and there became, surprisingly, just out of the blue, our Prime Minister Trudeau at the time said, well, it's all because he wants to take our critical minerals. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think that's an opportunity for alignment on critical minerals and for a critical mineral strategy that's more aligned.
Interesting. I think we have some time. Do we have any questions from the audience? Who's managing that for us?
Yes, we have. How does the relatively recent U.S. self-sufficiency in oil and gas affect U.S. long-term international interests?
Sonya, you want to take that one?
Well, you've seen, I think you look, the United States is exporting a lot of natural gas and oil now, but they also are using natural gas, more natural gas and oil than what they're producing. That's why I think there's still a strong need for, if America wants to be energy dominant, there's still a strong need for oil and gas supplies from Canada. 3.9 million barrels a day of oil flow into the United States. That's not replaceable. That's not easily replaceable for the United States. If they were to try to replace that oil, they would have to start reversing pipelines to refineries that are configured to take a heavier blend. They would have to start maybe looking at importing Venezuelan oil again, or more oil from Saudi Arabia or Iran to replace it. So I think America wants to be energy dominant and more energy independent, but I think it will be better off and better served if it strengthens the alignment and relationships and trade relationships with its closest friend and ally right to the north, who sits on top of the third largest reserves of oil on the planet and huge reserves of natural gas.
Jimmy, thoughts on geopolitics of that?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, Canada, United States, that's a relationship that we have to take care of, and certainly it is a symbiotic relationship that serves us both very well. Right. You know, the finds in Guyana have been helpful. I think Guyana will overtake Venezuela by the end of this year in production. We're not invading Venezuela. Nobody asked a question. I'll go ahead and tell y'all that ain't gonna happen with the forces we have down there right now. I ran counter-narcotics for the Americas also. And this is kind of like, I said in the New York Times, it's cooking an egg with a blowtorch. You know, you don't take F-35s to run after fishing boats with cocaine on them. Having said that, there's a big question if Venezuela's going to get back in the game. And unfortunately, the Gulf Coast refineries that were kind of built around that heavy crude, they're not going to get a big influx of that stuff anytime soon. So to the extent that we get it from Canada or elsewhere, it's important. The bigger geopolitical question, being energy dominant, being energy independent, what is it? It gives us room to maneuver. We don't have to be involved in every issue that arises in the Middle East, for instance, because we're no longer dependent on supply. Right. You know, this isn't 1973 or 1978. I remember I was in the backseat of the car. I wasn't driving to get gas, right? I just want to set the record straight on how old I am. I was in the car. I was alive, but I wasn't driving it. But those of you who remember, those were rough days. We're not there anymore. And being energy independent gives us the ability to pick and choose when we want to be engaged. In a relationship with Canada, crucial.
Interesting. We have 40 seconds. I think we have time for one more question. Do we have another one from the back? Hearing none. We may give you, yep. Is that, I hear somebody.
Thank
Okay.
you for joining us for this session. Thank you to our moderator, Randel Young, and our panelists. Our next session is From Moonshot to Market, the case for breakthrough technologies. It'll be starting momentarily. Thank you. You all have a great day.
Thank you very much.